In this video, I want to explain to you the three different kinds of saws, power saws, that make sense for building a deck. And the first one, and if you can only have one power saw, then a handheld circular saw is the one to get. This is also another handheld circular saw, a little bit of a different design. Both of these are cordless, and cordless is nice. Battery technology has come a long way so that you really get a lot of cutting or drilling or whatever from a charge in a battery. But you do pay a premium for that too. So if you're building your tool collection on a budget, then go corded. You're going to get, well, probably a little more powerful performance, in fact. It's a little less convenient because you have a cord and you have to plug it in and things, but you will save a fair amount of money and you don't have to buy replacement batteries. Replacement cordless batteries now are usually warranted for about 3 years. Rigid actually has a lifetime warranty on batteries. So it's not as bad as it used to be as far as keeping your batteries go. They also last longer than they used to. But you still will need to replace them unless you get a rigid and register that tool. So corded's okay. Cordless is nice if you can get it. This tool will do all the cutting that you need to do for your deck. It won't do all the cutting as well as some of these other tools, but like I said, if you want one tool, then this is the one to get. I guess the main drawback, if you could say that, is that all of the cuts with this are hand guided. I mean, I guess you could clamp down a piece of wood to guide it for you, but generally speaking, if you're cross-cutting deck lumber, it's a hand-eye coordination thing. So I'll show you how that works in a second, but one tool, this is the one. You can cross-cut, you can rip wood, you can build a whole deck with a saw like this.
So, I'm going to do a cut there?
Yes, I am. I'm going to mark it here. This is just a test cut, just a sample cut to show you something. This applies to every kind of handheld circular saw.
Don't forget your safety glasses.
Ah, yes. So, there's two things you need to keep your eye on when you're trying to make an accurate cut like this. First of all, mark it. If the cut matters, there's nobody out there who's good enough to do 90-degree cuts every time without a mark. The next thing is you have to decide what side of the line you're going to cut on. You don't want to cut down the middle. In this case, we'll call this the waist side. So this is the piece we want. So we want to cut on the waist side of the line. And what you do is, can you see how I'm locating the blade to the left side of the line? I'm going to start this cut in a minute, but that's not the only thing I'm looking for. Every shoe, that's what this part of the saw is called, every shoe has these slots or marks or something that show you where the blade is going to cut. And in this case, since I'm set to 0 degrees bevel this way, so in other words I'm straight up and down, that slot in the shoe there represents the way the blade is going to cut. So I can have the saw teeth lined up here, but if I'm out here and I'm trying to follow the line, I'm going to bind the blade, and that's no good. So I'm going to start the cut now. I'm going to actually see where the blade is cutting in relation to the line. Then I'm going to adjust here and complete the cut so you can see it. Now, there's the cut. It's not perfect, I can see that. I can see I cut a little bit too far on that side of the line. It's not perfectly square all the way along. It's pretty close. And for most things, that would do fine. Now, as I'm going to show you, another saw, kind of the ultimate cross-cutting power tool, is the miter saw, or the chop saw. And it makes cuts like this perfectly accurately every time, very quickly, nice and smooth. That's what I'm going to show you in a second. But before we do that, I want to point out two different sort of configurations of circular saws. So, this one I just used, has the blade on the right-hand side of the saw. This one has the blade on the left-hand side of the saw. Now, personally, and most circular saws are like this, with the blade on the right. It's fine, you can use this, but as a right-handed user, and most users are right-handed, I have to look over the saw in order to see where that blade is cutting. For some reason, and I don't know exactly why, a minority of circular saws have the blade on the left, even though we live in a right-handed world. This is actually better for right-handed people because you can more easily see where the blade is cutting. It's not a huge deal, but it's right there. It's easy to see how it goes, and I actually prefer a left-hand blade configuration. So I should mention too that if you're investing in tools for your deck building project, don't just go by this video. This is just an introductory video. Contact me and I can give you some specific recommendations on different models, makes and models, depending on your budget. I'm constantly receiving tools from manufacturers for testing, so I know pretty well what the best tools are, what the best values are. So be sure to contact me and I can direct you in the right direction. If I was getting a second saw to help me with deck building, any other kind of home renovation fix-up stuff, some kind of a miter saw or a chop saw like this would be the thing. And as I mentioned previously, this is the ultimate cross-cutting tool. So cross-cutting is what I did with the circular saw there. It's any cut that goes across the grain. Not necessarily at 90 degrees either, it can be at differing angles. Ripping is cutting along the grain, and that's another matter. Table saws excel at that. I'm going to show the little table saw in a minute, but this is a miter saw. Once again, it's cordless. If you want the best value for your tool buying dollar, don't go cordless, although cordless tools have really come a long way lately, and they are convenient. This is called a chop saw because the blade chops down. This, in fact, is called a sliding compound chop saw, and what that means is that, well, first of all, it chops, and then it also slides, so you can cut wider material. Even though the blade here is quite small, it's not a particularly large blade as miter saws go. They go 10-inch, 12-inch even. But the sliding action does let you cut fairly wide stock. You can change the angle by rotating this. A good miter saw will go beyond 45 degrees, a little bit. You can see that here. So there's the 45 degree mark. We're a little bit beyond. You know, we're getting close to 50 here on this side and this side. That's kind of nice because occasionally when you want to do what theoretically should be a 45 degree angle, to get it to work, you might have to go a little bit more. So, and the final thing, it's a sliding compound miter saw, and by compound, yeah, I mean you can move this, loosen this thing back here, and you can tilt it'll tilt on both sides. Actually, it'll go both ways if it's activated, and this is a feature that you don't often need or use in deck building. It's a compound angle, but for trim work and things, it's useful for that. So that's where it gets its name, sliding compound miter saw. For most deck stuff, most deck construction, you're going to be doing straight cross cuts, and they're nice and fast and extremely accurate and very square and nice and smooth, and you know, that's why I like them. They really help you to do a much better job, as you'll see. So I'm going to make a cut here, but before I do, I want to explain things. So before, I had to mark the cut. I had to mark the cut with a square, and I had to follow that, and you know, you rarely get it right on perfect. With this, I don't have to worry about angles or anything. This is set to cut a 90 degrees. So all I need to know is where to place the cut. And you can see that little pencil line there. Now, Milwaukee and DeWalt are two companies that employ a method for helping you to see where the blade is going to cut before it actually cuts that I really like. There are different ways of doing this, but if you take a look here, there's a light. I press this little button. The light will come on even when I hit the saw too, but I can also get the light to go on. And you see there's a shadow there. The blade is casting a shadow. So I know exactly where that blade is going to cut. Now, what I'll do is the light will be on when I start to cut, and the shadow of the blade will even be more representative of how it cuts when it's spinning. Because right now, if you look closely, you can see little wider spots where the teeth are. But once it's spinning, it'll be one solid shadow line that lets me know exactly where this thing's going to cut, and it works every time. So let me just start this up, and we'll try the cut. Now, can you see that? I actually split the line. It's exactly what I wanted, and it happens every time because the machine is meant for that, and it's perfectly square this way as well as this way, and a nice smooth edge too. I mean, it's not furniture grade, but it's certainly more than fine enough for deck use. So if I was buying a miter saw, sliding compound miter saw, for general use, I would go with a 10 or 12 inch model, something that can cut a 2x12 at 90 degrees. I have a saw like that and I use it, but for the project I'm working on right behind me here, I don't need to cut that wide. So I just use my little portable one, and it's handy. I can bring it out, I can put it back in if it starts to rain. There's no problem. So that's saw number 2, miter saw, chop saw. There's one more that I'd like to show you that does something else really well too. So the third deck building saw, it's the most unnecessary, I guess, for deck construction, but it's still nice to have sometimes, and that's a portable table saw. That's what this one is here. Once again, it's cordless, and if you want the most tool for your money, go corded. But you're looking for something in the category of table saws called benchtop table saws. And that's just because they're small and portable, and you might use them on a bench. They also have portable stands that you can use as well. But unlike these other saws, the blade, it rotates, but it doesn't actually move anywhere. You move the workpiece over the blade instead of the blade through the workpiece, like you saw before. So all table saws, you can vary the height of the blade sticking up. I've taken off the guard here so that you can see things better. And when you're using a saw like this, this is mostly for what they call ripping, which is cutting solid lumber along its length. You can also use it for cutting sheet goods too. And this part of the saw here is called the fence, and this kind of supports the workpiece and lets you slide it in an accurate manner. So I'm just going to adjust this to cut off this bit of inner part of the tree that came off this hunk of scrap. So you can move this wherever you want. There's a scale here that shows you how far it is from the blade, and you just lock it down. Now, as far as blade height goes, the rule of thumb is that the blade should come up above the workpiece by about 1/4 of an inch. So I could make it stick up higher, and that would offer the benefit of less chance for kickback, because the blade is when it's encountering the wood, it's going into a more downward direction. If I wanted to minimize, but of course the drawback here is that there's all kinds of blade above the wood, and you know, if I'm careless, I could run into that with my hand. So on the other side of the equation, you know, making it so that the blade just barely peeks through eliminates the accidental cutting hazard. But because the teeth are encountering the wood as they travel in a more horizontal direction, it increases the chance for a kickback of the wood. So rule of thumb, you know, bring it up a little bit, 1/4 of an inch or so, and that'll serve you well. One other thing before I actually make a cut so you can see how this thing works. I talked about kickback, and that's where this spinning blade, which is spinning very fast, for whatever reason catches the wood, and instead of chewing through it, throws the wood back. Now, don't let me frighten you too much here. It hardly ever happens, and it almost never ever happens if you use the right kind of blade. And you see here, this is a tooth. It's a carbide tooth. It does the cutting. Another carbide tooth here, another carbide tooth. But behind each tooth, there's this little bump of metal. You can see it here and here and here. Every tooth has its bump of metal. And the bump of metal, its arc of travel is just slightly lower than the arc of travel of the tip of the blade. So essentially, this bump here, this one here, limits the amount of wood that this tooth can bite in any one given revolution. Because a kickback happens when, instead of chewing through the wood, the tooth grabs the wood and then throws it. So if you can limit the bite of a tooth, then it's not going to be trying to bite off more wood than it can chew through as it goes through. So that's what these bumps are called. They're called anti-kickback pawls, P-A-W-L-S. And most blades have them these days. It's actually a safety requirement required by law in Europe. The only blades that won't have this are blades that are very fine, that have a lot of teeth. There's no room for the bumps. But table saw blades aren't usually like that, at least not general purpose blades for the kind of cutting you're going to see here. But that is something to look for when you're selecting a blade. So like I said, the guard's removed so you can see what's going on. Safety glasses, a must. And I also wear hearing protection. It's not terribly loud, but over the years it's going to build up. Any damage might build up. So put on the muffs, turn on the saw, and away we go. Now that's interesting. What happened there? Well, I'll tell you what happened there. I'm pretty sure we're low on battery here. So yeah, we are. You see, the modern lithium batteries are quite smart, and you can push that button and you can see I'm on its last legs here as far as the charge goes. So I'll just swap out another battery. It is kind of interesting. Both these are 18-volt batteries. That's part of Milwaukee's system, and this is a high output. It's actually a 12 amp hour, which is the biggest batteries get nowadays. But even though the voltage is the same, the larger battery will maintain its voltage to a higher level under load. And so when you're dealing with high draw power tools like this one, the bigger battery is going to give you better performance, even though the voltage is the same. So this has got enough juice in it. I think it's going to work fine for us. And we'll just complete the cut. So if you want to cut a piece of deck lumber to a specific width, this is your tool. You can do it with a circular saw. If the cut matters, you're going to want to clamp a second piece of wood to act as a guide for the saw. Otherwise, you're not going to get this kind of result. But that's the bottom line. 3 tools for deck building: the handheld circular saw, miter saw, and if you can manage to fit it into the budget, a table saw. Well, thanks for joining me this week for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Subscribe on YouTube if you like it, and hit the notification bell so you know when I send out new videos. Give me a thumbs up if you like the video, and check out my website. The address is in the description box. Lots of people visit every month and sign up for my newsletter. I think you'll enjoy it every Saturday morning.